we were talking about the Maharal's version of the three crowns, right? And how much they differed from mine. And he was saying that the crown of kahuna is actually the perfection or the accomplishment of the nefesh, of the most physical side aspect of the soul's work, because the job of a Cohen is to sanctify the nefesh. And Melucha, on the other hand, is the neshama, the most spiritual side, because it's the neshama that rules the brain and the body to give them a mission and what to do, and the what's it called? I guess rules is the best metaphor. So therefore he swaps the order of those two, but he still leaves ruach, which we've been vaguely calling the middle, related to Torah study and the mind and so on. So it's not entirely on a different plane than too many open windows. I'm distracted. Okay, it's not entirely on a different.
I'm sorry. I just realized I have to take care of something. I will be back in a couple minutes. I feel really bad.
Okay.
Please don't wait for me.
Okay. So that's where we were, right? We were talking about the three aspects of the soul and how the Maharal, by making it not the physical, but not that kahuna is the perfection of the spiritual, it's the spiritualization of the physical. And that's how he ends up swapping the two roles, right? Melucha is not running this world, it's the soul running this world. And because it's the imposition of the soul, so he ends up with the two in opposite places than what I would have considered the naive read of that, of that correlation. But I realized something about what he wrote, and that is he's identifying the kahuna with the sanctification of the physical, because on the Mizbeach you offer karbanos, right? And therefore animals are being sanctified. But, and this is, I think, where I started off in the opposite direction, that's not the Mizbeach that has a crown. The Mizbeach that has a crown is the one where is the one with the spices.
Okay.
Which is the most ephemeral of physical things. And therefore, like, more along, well, you see how I would get to the idea that the Keser Kahuna would therefore be the kind, not the sanctification of the physical, just sanctity, because we're dealing with odors, and odors are considered so non-physical halachically that you can't steal them. Which means that intellectual property is also an intangible. You can't steal intellectual property either. And that is deduced from, in other words, the source for modern day discussions about copyright law come from the fact that you can't steal an odor. I mean, if an odor is already, you can't steal it because it's not tangible, then clearly intellectual property, which is not physical at all, is going to qualify as an intangible, as it's not property. So there are other grounds for saying it's prohibited, but they don't go with heft. Rav Asher Weiss, who's the new name and the new up and coming name in halacha lately, says it's Hamas from the term in the beginning of the Mabul, where right, the world was filled with Hamas, and Chazal say, what was Hamas? Each one steals a grape. You go to a grape seller, each one steals less than a pruta. So each one steals one grape. The guy's left without a parnasa, but nobody actually stole. So with that metaphor, Rav Asher Weiss says intellectual theft is Hamas, not Gneva. Other possibilities are Hazagas Kavul, which is a prohibition against unfair competition, and therefore you're taking away somebody's livelihood. It's that kind of thing. There's a really interesting legal philosophy in Malaman Lahoil that says it can't be that something's recognized as moral property in secular law and halacha would ignore it. So by the fact that society considers it property, the halachos of property have to apply. It's a very interesting, he's not saying dina de malchus dina, that is usher because it's illegal. He's saying because it's considered property, legally, halacha has to respect that property and deal with it halachically. Right? Once you live in a civilization that says you can own an idea, you have to treat the ownership of ideas the way you treat, using halachic rules of ownership. It's an interesting idea. I repeated it because it's novel, not because it's like the majority opinion. It's just creative and nice. It has a little truthiness to it because it's what I want to believe. But yeah, we went far afield there. So the reason why we went this direction, John, was because I was saying that the Maharal swapped my naive read of how to match the nefesh to the crown would be to say the nefesh is the crown of Melucha, right? And therefore, it's the kli that doesn't have a crown associated with the nefesh is the kior, because that washes away tuma, and nefesh is all about the body. And the kli with a crown that corresponds to the nefesh would therefore be the shulchan, and therefore the crown of kahuna, because that's physical needs, and taking care of each other's physical needs is what you need a king for. Organize society, make sure everybody's needs are met, and nobody's swallowing each other alive. We didn't do that Mishnah, but I assume you all know the reference. What the Maharal does by saying Melucha is the soul in charge of the mind and the body is that means that Melucha is associated with neshama, and he does that by talking about Lev Melech biyad Hashem, right? And he therefore gets this whole structure of the highest level of the soul being the Melech, because it's in charge of the rest. But the problem is that in order for that to work, he's assuming that kahuna relates to the Mizbeach HaNechoshes, because there you're taking physical animals and sanctifying them. And what the little bit you missed that got me talking about odors is the one with the crown is Mizbeach HaZahav. And odors are so ephemeral that halacha considers them, there's no way to steal an odor, and that is the precedent for saying that you can't steal an idea in halacha, because Geneva only applies to tangibles. And if odor is too intangible to be subject to Geneva, then of course intellectual property would be too intangible to be subject to Geneva. That was how I got onto that tangent about intellectual property, quite a distance from kahuna. So I don't really understand the Maharal on this point, but I think there is a certain elegance in the fact that he's making these dynamics and not reductionist. In other words, his version of Keser Malchus is a relationship between the neshama and the ruach nefesh, right? You are using your neshama to run your ruach nefesh, and he's making kahuna as lifting and sublimating the nefesh. Remember when he spoke? The Gra spoke about sanctifying the nefesh with a Shabbos meal, or the way Yaakov wanted a meal in order to get prophecy, that the happiness in the nefesh could be used to further the higher levels of the soul, and that is how you were supposed to be building up from the ground up, as opposed to the castle in the air. So that's the way he's treating kahuna, that kahuna is that means of sanctifying the nefesh. And then the last thing we touched on after that was, and therefore the Cohen comes before the Melech, right? The Melech comes before the Cohen because the Melech, it represents a higher level of existence. And the Chacham it comes before the Melech because the Chacham is the highest of the levels of existence. But now, okay, so basically, he also ties out the fact that a Kohen is born a Kohen, or not even conceived a Kohen, because he mentions the Tipa Kadosha Lagamre. A Kohen is conceived to be a Kohen, and therefore it's all about the body, and therefore the Kohen Talmud Chacham Mamzer Talmud Chacham comes before Kohen Gadol Am Haaretz. And the conversation at the end of last week was, why does the Kohen Gadol have to be in Am Haaretz? And I really just think it's a way to, to separate the concerns. Remember, I likened it to triage, right? You could have rules for triage, but in practice, you never have a clear-cut case of A goes before B, because there are other ways to measure importance, and they very rarely all line up the same way. And it's easier, if you're talking law, to just separate out the concerns and not discuss a Kohen Gadol who's a Talmud, who learns. To a Kohen Gadol who's a Talmud Chacham, but not as big of a Talmud Chacham as the Mamzer. Like, exactly when do you cross the line becomes a judgment call. Whereas if you separate out and say one is all wisdom and the other one is all status of birth, it becomes very, you could just discuss and say that Chachma, that a person develops himself, is a higher triage priority than status of birth. Which brings us to Chaf Hey and to sharing the screen. Anybody have anything to say about that review?
Yeah, I was just writing that. I'm amused at how we relate to the material and what you mentioned, spices versus the korban, like the basar, right? And it reminded me of the discussion we had about the light of the menorah and so forth. At some points, one interacts more with the most rounded of things. In this case, the meat. In other cases, one goes to the other extreme, the ruach or the or. So it's interesting how one can evoke different relationships to the divine and so forth. Just a thought. I'm finished, right, but still.
I think it's interesting that that the Maharal ends up discussing two different ways of sanctifying the physical, because the way of the king is to have the soul use or motivate the physical, and the way of the Kohen is to take the physical and lift it up. Hey, I could actually tie that to Shavuos. There's a machlokas about Mamad Har Sinai. Did heaven come down to earth for the revelation, right? Or was the earth brought up, right? I'm not saying it right. There's a problem with ad hoc, right? But there's the idea would be, were they temporarily in heaven when they received the nevuah, or did heaven come down to earth? And those are two different ways of seeing revelation. And I kind of think that that's similar to the distinction that the Maharal's making here, that the way of the Melech is that the soul runs things on earth. And the way the Cohen is to take the things of earth and to sublimate them and use them for a higher purpose. But one is like a governing, one's trying to raise the physical up, and the other one is the heaven coming down to earth. That was the way I kind of, I don't know, free association. There's also, by the way, a machlokas about the Mizbeach Hadama. So the Mizbeach Nechoshes is also called the Mizbeach Hadama. And there's a machlokas whether it's because it sits on the earth or because it's full of earth.
In Kabbalah, there's the concept, and I'm not claiming to understand this, of a Sarusa de La'ela and a Sarusa de Lasata, which sounds very similar to the things that you're saying, whether
Right.
awakening comes from above or the awakening comes from on earth below.
Right. Sarusa de La'ela, though, is usually like God starts. The way I think of it is, Sarusa de La'ela is Hashivenu Hashem Elecha v'nashuva. So God draws us and we return. Whereas the Sarusa de Lasata is Shuva Elai v'Shuva Aleichem.
Okay.
Right. So which starts the process of approachment.
Mhm.
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying that's usually the context in which it comes up in drushes.
And I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just
Okay.
saying that I'm just drawing a parallel.
Okay. So now we're at Chaf Hey. Did I start sharing the screen? No. So let me do that. And did I succeed? I must have, because we're a strip of people in the corner. Oh, Yehuda's barely in the window. Okay, good. So
It's good.
What?
You said I'm barely.
Well, you're in.
It's good.
You're in the window.
Oh, okay.
I actually don't know if my drawing it into the screen actually is what makes it get recorded or not. I don't know how the recording actually works. And really, like, does what I see get recorded or some idealized version, or I don't know. So now he wants you to understand great things. Two of these three crowns, ein roi sheyu nimtzam biyachad. Hu keser kahuna v'keser malchus. This is why you should not be learning this Maharal on Hanukkah. Right? Because the Hashmonayim grabbed both the crown of kahuna and malchus. Well, they were given the crown of kahuna. They grabbed the crown of malchus. V'chein hu b'Yerushalmi in Harius. Ve'eviu haramban Parshas Vayechi. This is on the pasuk about Yasser Shevet Yehuda, that the scepter won't leave Judah. Ein moshchin melachim kohanim. You do not anoint kings to be kohanim. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Anturi. Al Shem lo Yasser Shevet Yehuda. Amar B'chia Barabba. L'man yerichu yamim al mamlachto hu uvanav b'kerev Yisrael. So this is the first pasuk, that he'll have a long life on his rule, on his reign, he and his children among Israel. And it says in the next parak, the beginning of the next parak, lo yiyeh lekohanim halaviyim. Kolomar she'ein lekohanim chelek b'malchus asher zachat kasuf lefnei. This is one of the standard methods of drasha. Two pasukim are adjacent. We take out the self pasuk between, and we kind of read how would it read without the self pasuk, and therefore, this lengthy reign would never happen to a Cohen or Levi. What's the reason for this? Wouldn't it be wonderful to have all the brothers sitting together? You get both crowns together. This guy has so much accomplishment. both he achieved both goals in one what's it called? He achieved both goals in one body. I mean, isn't that what you want? I'm not sure my is anything but poetic. Because that's more about getting along with other people. It's more about Aaron not being jealous. Sorry, Moshe not being jealous that Aaron became Kohen Gadol. Aval aperish abor bezeh ki elu shtei ksarim ein zeh kazeh. These two crowns are different in kind. V'hei mechulakim, and they're distinct. Ki akeser shel kahuna kedusha gufanis. The crown of kahuna is bodily sanctity. The kesher shamachas kedusha nafshis, and the crown of malchus is holiness of the soul. So we still see the three kinds of tov that we started with. They're just in opposite places than I had naively assumed.
I would have thought the other way too. I mean,
I still think the other way.
Melech can be, can be conquest or whatever, bestowed on you out of a bunch of candidates or something, like the children of David.
Okay, more than that, Hillel.
But kahuna is just, it's intrinsic, like you said, from the time they're conceived. And so I would think that's more, the soul. But whatever.
Well,
so let's find out let's see why he thinks that way, I guess.
Oh, we know why he thinks that way. He thinks that way because he found lots of psukim about kahuna and bodies, and he found, and that you're born a kohen, and therefore it can't be a spiritual accomplishment.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas malucha, only the eligibility you're born into, and the actual having it's something you have to earn. And then he talks about Leif Melech and so on, and proves it with psukim. I personally am not convinced by this Maharal that we got it wrong, but we're learning the Maharal. Let's at least suspend judgment until we get there. If you're prepared for one, you're not prepared for the other. Shu kenegdo, because they're opposites. Hashem mechulakim, and they're separate.
Got separate tribal affiliations.
Well, that does guarantee separation.
Yeah.
In other words, if you don't want them to go to the same person, the easiest way to do it is to assign them to different families. Right? Whereas opposed to Keser Torah, which doesn't get assigned to anybody. Lo Yikshe, because, well, I guess it is, because there are problems with non-Jews studying Torah. So I guess it is assigned, but it's assigned to, whatever. You got what I mean. Below Yikshe Keser Torah. You shouldn't ask, how is Keser Torah its own kind of Kedusha, and therefore, how could you be both a Kohen and a Talmud Chacham, or a Melech and a Talmud Chacham? Afal Gav Shehu Mechulak Min Keser Kunu Keser Malchus, Ein Lomar Muchan Lechad Ein Muchan L'Nasheni. You can't say that being prepared for one means you're not prepared for the other. Shedavar Zeh Haya Kasha Im Lo Haya Keser Torah Nivdelas Min Adam. That would only be a thing if the Keser Torah were part of a person. And now you understand why he labored so hard to define the Keser Torah as distinct but not separate from a person. Right? It's not physical, it's knowledge, but it sits in the head. Aval Keser Torah Nivdelas Min Olam. Right? In contrast to perfection of body and soul, perfection of the Torah is distinct from a person. Right? Even though we said that it stands on a person, by a person, meaning it's connected. It's because the mind has a connection to physical existence. Because it's there with the person. The mind is both part of and separate from the. He's basically relying on the mind-body dilemma to say that just as the mind is both of and not of the person, Torah is both of and not of the person, right? And therefore, you could be ready for Torah while being ready to either raise the physical or bring the spiritual down. Whereas if you're working on bringing the spiritual down, you are inherently not prepared to raise the physical. There are different ways of viewing the world. You can't be viewing them both in the same way, at the same time. Therefore, you wouldn't say that if you're ready for one, let's say for kahuna, you're not ready for Torah. Because they're different. They're different. They're separate enough topics that you could be, that being ready for one, being what's the word I'm trying to look for? Prepared is not the word I'm looking for. I'm looking for something that really captures mukhan better than ready. Being immersed in one, being
designated.
Okay, that's good. The mukhan's not designated. We'll use designated, right? If you're in a Cohen stance, you're inherently not in a Melech stance, right? If you are looking for how do I bring this up, you're not looking for how do I bring the soul down. There are different ways of achieving kedusha, right? They're just. Whereas Torah, he's saying Torah is both of and not of a person. Or the way I said it last time, it's connected but distinct from being a person, because the mind is connected and distinct from the rest of the person.
I suppose it's like musical talent, musical ability. You have to have both the talent, the innate talent, the ability to recognize and produce sound accurately, and the
aesthetic sense.
Yeah, and the intellectual part of learning how to do it, which also contributes to the physical, which is practicing. Like if you don't, my parents used to kvetch about a singer named Mario Lanza, who had been told when he was young that he had the potential to become why am I blanking on his name? The great opera singer from the 20s. Caruso, that's it. He had the potential to be another Caruso. If he continued to develop himself. And so he stopped developing. He said, I'm already, I don't need to be even greater. I'm already compared to being Caruso. So he didn't develop to that point. There's a book about that, which from the 30s, I think, which talks about my father's family in that sort of sense, because my father's family were mostly musicians, and so there's a genetic component to it, but there's also there's installation component to actually doing well with it. So too, you have with intellectual activity, which Torah is evidently the pinnacle of, for at least for Maharal and for Judaism, that you need the mental capacity to understand things and acquire knowledge and so on, but you also have to learn to do things and practice the whole mental integration and so on.
That's how you see this duality of being both of and beyond the person.
Yeah. I mean, there's an innate part, and there's a part that you develop in order to get to the Kesser Torah, the Kesser physics, whatever, the Kesser piano.
I hear. V'zeu sha'amru. So now he's gonna analyze what I started on earlier, that the easiest way to separate the crowns is to assign them to different groups of people. V'zeu sha'amru. Keser kuna zacha bo Aaron v'zaro. Keser malchus zacha bo David v'zaro. Right? So Aaron got one crown, David got another crown. Keser shel Torah munach kol harotza lezakos bo yizaka. And the crown of Torah continues to rest. So whoever, he put it down, I guess. Whoever wants to earn it can earn it. It requires a particular preparation.
It's like the crown of Torah is resting on the table, and whoever wants to can take it.
Right. So Keser Kuna requires hachana miyuchedes. It requires a special preparation. L'kach zacha ba dafka Aaron v'zaro shemuchanim dafka lezeh. So they have the innate talent that it takes to become kohanim. V'chein Keser
Malchus. Not even a
Malchus.
talent for them. It's just the nature, because they're descended from Aaron, because they're descended from David.
Yeah, I was just saying that it's the talent is genetic. V'chein Keser Malchus. Tzarich l'Keser zeh hachana miyuchedes also requires its own special preparation. V'zacha b'Keser zeh David Azaro ki hem muchanim lezeh. They are prepared for it. Right, they're designated for it. Mipnei kach asher muchan l'Keser zos eno muchan ala hacheres ki muchlokim. Thereby they're separate, right? If you're ready for one, in other words, Aaron's abilities and David's abilities are innately different.
Yeah. I'm trying to think maybe qualified or something. I'm thinking in terms of like whatchamacallit, Mesilas Yesharim, that you develop your personality to the point where you're the sort of person that Nevuah would come to, but then it depends on whether Hashem actually sends it to you. So in this case, by being from the line of David or from the line of Aaron, you are the sort of person that Malchus or Kahuna can come to.
Well, let's give a piano metaphor.
But
let's give a piano metaphor. You can inherit from David the manual dexterity to play piano, but if you don't practice, you'll never be good at it anyway.
Right. So I'm thinking more than rather than prepared is maybe it's qualified, because you can fill qualifications without consciously trying. You just have the genetic ability.
Right, but it does have connotations of designation, like Moshe said. Like, look at the next sentence. Aval keser Torah v'mnei keser azosu haseichel hanivdal min ha'adam. I should use a mouse and not my fingers, so the rest of you see what I'm pointing at. Keser Torah, because this keser is the seichel, which is separate from the person or distinct from the person. Ein tzarich b'zeh hachana. Doesn't need, you see, designation kind of fits that sentence better than, right?
Yeah.
Because you won't think right if you don't learn how to think. I mean, like, you need to learn certain thinking skills to think right. I mean, like you can't teach a first grader Gemara because there are certain deductive reasoning skills he hasn't learned yet.
I wasn't ready for it until 9th grade, but we had.
I was.
From 7th,
I have to tell you.
8th grade anyway, which I kept
I have
failing.
to tell you. Sorry. It didn't. Yeah. No, I was in a school where Gemara started in 5th grade.
Yeah.
But like by the time I went to 5th grade, I was in a school where the first graders were learning Bereshis in Anfang, Barela Kim Debishta gemacht. So in that kind of cheder-y kind of school, where the first graders are learned to teach into Yiddish, even though like most of them speak English as a first language. Yeah, so there, Gemara is obviously going to be 5th grade. You're not going to make it any later than that.
No.
But I actually became a fan of that methodology because you're not going to get them to comprehend the Gemara, right? But you do get them to memorize the phrasing of the Gemara. So they end up learning the language and the phrasing before they start. Language skills fade, right? The earlier you start somebody learning the language of the Gemara, the better off you are. So maybe the old way of doing things, which was a little younger and a little more rote, actually has advantages over using the latest educational principles and waiting until you're intellectually ready to understand what you're saying.
It's very interesting. Lahavdil, in the secular studies, 9th grade, I went to physics, math, science, computer, magnet, and we were doing a physics class. It was actually pretty advanced for 9th graders. I almost flunked it. The teacher was very good, but the concepts really weren't, getting into my head right. Interestingly enough, the same teacher later taught a course in history of science junior year, which enthralled me and kind of got into my professional direction. And later in college, a physics professor said physics kind of has to ferment in the brain like good old wine or cheese. But I thought, that may be applicable to basic Gemara concepts as well.
Right. So there
was a problem in Halliday and Resnick that I learned in 11th grade physics, and then again in 12th grade physics, and then again as a freshman in college, and only the third time did I actually understand it.
But what's
right? So to get back to the Maharal, sorry, Jordy.
No, just I actually taught physics in middle school. Well, actually, it would be American high school. It was a Jewish school. It was quite interesting, actually. I was the only fellow. My kids would always say, "Please wear a yarmulke, teacher." I said, "I might wear it. I might not wear it, but you have to wear it because it's a uniform. It's not a matter of. I'm a physics teacher here. I'm not here as a Jew." But as a physics teacher, it was fun. But yes, you need to adjust knowledge. Let's say knowledge to this, to how the brain develops. Abstract thought comes only gradual. But that's another story. As far as learning the rhythms of the Gemara, it makes perfect sense. It is particular language, let's say all the people going on in Talmud and so forth. But anyway, you're the experts here.
Right. I'm just saying, the later theories would have you delay starting Gemara until a child can know the difference between answering the second question, or admitting the second question undid your answer to the first question, and now you got to answer the first question again. That kind of complex reasoning, a 5th grader is going to get lost in. But he will learn the language. So the fact that they were teaching me Gemara as a rote in 5th grade may have actually not been so dumb. But we got all into this whole tangent just because the Maharal said that Keser Torah ain't tzarich bezek hachana. If I skip a line, Keser Torah, and then I skip the year ain't tzarich bezek hachana, he can't mean hachana as prep. That's how we got to this whole tangent about when are you mentally ready for things, because clearly there are complex thought requires prep. Hachana may be closer to Moshe Yehuda's designation. Or some mental state immersion was another idea I played with. So, if you're immersed in a Cohen mindset, then you're mentally ready. So in that sense, it's hachana. Not hachana like developing the skill, but just being in the right mindset at the time. But you can't say that Torah doesn't require hachana. You can't throw if somebody's a beginner, you're not going to throw the hard stuff at them. It's clearly a chana to getting to Kesser Torah.
I don't think that's what I'm listening to this whole discussion, and maybe I'm having flashbacks because I'm busy dealing with New York State substantial equivalency regulations. I don't think it means that it doesn't need preparation. I think it means that it doesn't require a specific innate quality. Everybody could learn, and maybe some people could learn at a higher level, maybe someone could learn at a lower level, maybe someone can learn at a higher level after a time of learning at a lower level, which is pretty much every kid as they grow older. But I don't think it doesn't mean hachana. It means it doesn't need it's some innate quality to make you able to do this. Right? I cannot be a Kayan as much as I try because my father and my grandfather were not Kayanim. I cannot be a Melech as much as I try because I'm not from Yehuda. I mean, maybe I am. Who knows? But not that I know of. But Torah, everyone could learn, and
I mean, odds are very high. You're from Yehuda, by the way.
Odds are very high.
But if you're not a Cohen or a Levi, and Yehuda is like 3 times the population of Binyamin, right? Right. I mean, there were trace populations of the other 10, particularly Shimon, who was living in Malchus Yehuda. The whole story of when does Shimon get lost is an interesting question. I have theories about, but that's a totally different conversation. So let's get back to this one. I was just trying to get a sense. He's using hachana all through these paragraphs. I was trying to use his sentence. I started rethinking how I was translating the earlier ones. That's why this became a thing to me. So yeah, it could be hachana is more of a nature preparation than a nurture preparation.
Think of the hachana of Kahuna as what Aaron HaKohen did before he became a Kohen to merit becoming a Kohen, and that hachana is what makes his descendants thousands of years later Kohanim. That's the hachana I think he means.
I hear. This would require jettisoning Alan's suggestion about the difference between Torah and Kesser Torah. Right, because not everybody could. You're insisting that Kesser Torah is everybody at their own level, whereas Alan's Kesser Torah would be the Shul Rav, the Av Beistin, the Nasi, the somebody. You know what I mean? It would be an office, not somebody who is qualified to assume an office, not more or less. You know what I mean? Like the Melech, the something in the Torah world.
I don't think his reading is a standard one.
I'm not one way or the other. I'm just keeping the ideas. I'm just facilitating conversation between ideas. I don't really have a firm opinion on any of it. I mean, I have a firm opinion, but not on this particular point. If I didn't have a firm opinion, I would just say, hey, this is interesting and worth looking at. But yeah.
On occasion, we've all ran into your firm opinions, Micha.
Occasionally?
On occasion.
On occasion. Meaning what? Only once every second minute. And that's why anybody could grab it, because as Moshe, if we run with Moshe Yehuda's idea, because there doesn't need to be a Aaron or a David who prepares the way for you. That gets what you were trying to say? Or did I spin it too far?
It's something. No, it's something in your nature from way back then.
V'akol nirmaz b'masha b'keser azos ksiv alav u'mizeh tavin hadvarim asher be'arnu b'perek Rabbi Omer Eitzel Yossi HaKohen Chassid, which we did not look at. But we did look at the keser that's a love. There were 2 of the crowns were low, vasisa low, right? And the crown of the Aron was a love. And that was his proof that the crown of Melucha and that the crown of Torah was distinct from the person who had it, whereas the crown of Melucha was not separate. V'isbar lecha inyan elu shlosh kasarim. So now you got the 3 crowns. Lekach keser shem tov hu keneged mahus ha'adam. So keser shem tov is keneged the essence of a person. Ki hashem ba al mahus mushpat min agashmi. Is this enough, Moshe Yehuda, for you to let go of the idea that keser shem tov really means your reputation among other people?
Thinking.
Okay. This is where I got the idea that keser shem tov is the reputation you ought to have, not the reputation you have.
I'm listening with an open mind. I see what you're saying.
Okay.
Let's keep on going and see.
Hamushpat min hagashmi. So the shame is the essence of a person aside from his physical. Kamoshe elu gimel kasarim kol echad neged chelak echad sheba'adam. These 3 crowns are the 3 aspects of a person. V'chein keser shem tov keneged mahus ha'adam. Right. So these 3 are about, if I could borrow an idea from another school of thought, 3 aspects of the form of a person, and keser shem tov speaks to the substance of a person.
But only the spiritual substance.
Well, I would argue that a person is spiritual substance. Is a person a body and soul, or is a person soul?
Okay.
Like that's
okay.
Shemizet tavin ki kol eila gimel gasarim heim neged ha'adam. These 3 crowns are correspond to a person. L'kach amar gimel gasarim. Therefore, it counts 3 crowns in the beginning of the Mishnah. Klomer sharoi liyos gimel lo pachas v'lo yoser. Because there's an inherent 3ness about being a person, right? There's the right, the left, and the place where they either meet or conflict, the place where they either join or conflict. The keser shem tov ola al gabehem is on top of them. Ki ilu gimel keneged adam mechalkav. These 3 are parts of a person, are keneged, the parts of a person. The keser shem tov keneged mahus ha'adam. The essence of a person himself, not parts. Ki hashem ba al mahus hamufshat. The shame comes from the essence of a person that is spread out. Right? This is, by the way, another reason why I think of the Maharal as somebody who talks in terms of relationships. Because your shame tov is you being extended beyond your limits.
Means spread out, or he means separate? Look where he says, or alamas hamufshat min hagashmi.
I think it extends beyond.
Okay, it's a valid reading. I hear that.
Okay. No, it's a valid reading not to, but the reason why I read that it was because it's both the essence of the person and it's mufshat. And now he's not saying it's minagashmi anymore. I don't know. Okay. Klala davar elu gimel ksarim ki mipnei sheyesh la'adam chelak echad hu aguf. These 3 crowns, comma. A person has one part that's the body. So Hashem gave him a part for corresponds to the body, and gave humanity a perfection, a way to elevate that is specific to this body. And therefore, there's a way to sanctify the body. Behem zera Aaron, and that is the children of Aaron. Keneged nefesh sheish ba'adam, bir Hashem yisbarach echad. Hashem yisbarach also defined one. V'nasan b'zeh ma'ala miyuchedes, he keser malchus. V'zeh zachad David v'zaro. Keneged aseichel sheish ba'adam, nasan leklal Yisrael haTorah. Sheknu ma'ala miyuchedes b'zeh, we call ha'umos. At this point, you know that the Maharal's Naran and the Gruz Naran are the same 3. because all three, right? Before Maharal said the crowns are nefesh, ruach, and neshama, and now he's defining nefesh as the aspect of the soul that deals with the body, ruach, the aspect of the neshama, the aspect of the soul that deals with spirituality, and seichel, the aspect of the soul that thinks. K'neged ha-seichel yesh ba'adam nasan l'klal Yisrael ha-Torah sheiknu malam yuchades b'zeh mikol ha'umos. Oh man, 1 second. You're blocking the X that I accidentally there. Mayata yiturat tzlacha. Therefore, you from. Oh, and now you have answered for you have the answer for yourself. Od kilo yitachin lamar arbik. Why it would never say there are 4 crowns. Blimnos me imahem keser shem tov. Kien eich yichlal elu. How could you make it one? How could you put it together as one, klal, as one collection? Shem keneged chelkei adam bilvad. These 3 are about parts of person. Begam keser shem tov. And the keser shem tov in that same group. Shashem ba al mahuso asichlis. Etzem amufshat. Ve'ein nechlal achelek im hamahus. Now, this is interesting. This is the same problem we had with the menorah before. The name Shem comes with his intellectual substance, right? Essence. Etzem mufshat. Ve'ein nechlal achelek im hamahus. But hold on. One of the ksarim was the ksarim of the seichel. He just said Keneged ha-seichel sheish ba'adam nasan l'klal Yisrael ha-Torah, and now he's saying keser shem tov is distinctly different because shem ba'al mahuso asichlis etzem mufshat ve'ein nechlal achelek im hamahus ve'ich sheyachim zeh lozeh. So sichlis is keser shem tov is different because it's sichlis. And sichlis, he's identifying with the etzem mushpat.
Look at the
and
next
the essence.
Go to the next line, please.
V'lo yomar ki yesh dal chalakim be'ilan peros alim anafim u'mahus ha'ilon. But my point is, he's calling seichel both anafim and mahus ha'ilon. Aval mahus ha'sichli hu b'mnei atzmo. Eino nichlalim osam sheim chalakim bilvad, v'davar ze mevuar, v'otavin sod elu gimel ksarim, v'keser shem tov al pi ha'chachma. So now he's separating what? How is keser shem tov different now from keser Torah? Moshe, are you talking into a mute button? Because
I'm sorry. I was just interrupting myself.
Okay. So the way I understood it was a keser shem tov. Keser Torah is the ability to think God's thoughts, right? And it's the second that we saw in the first Mishnah that we looked at from the Maharal, right? That it's the ability to because the Torah is the keser, is the thought that's all HaKadosh Baruch Hu's. It's totally separated from the guf, and therefore gives you the ability to be something more than a body, because now you start thinking in ways that are separated from the body. Right? Whereas keser shem tov is intellect itself in its ability to be mufshat. See, this is where I was going with the first Mishnah, because I vaguely remembered learning this Mishnah. That the keser shem tov is the very ability to get beyond self. It's not what you know, it's capacity for knowledge. In other words, keser shem tov comes from the fact that we can grow. Whereas Torah is the knowledge of God's wisdom that we actually have. You guys don't see what I'm saying.
I'm finding this whole last two paragraphs very, very, very vague.
So what he's saying is that there are three aspects to a person, right? Body, mind, and soul. And therefore, the soul itself has three aspects, right? One aspect to deal with staying alive, one aspect to deal with, the capacity to think, and one aspect to actually connect with spirituality and heaven and all this. And therefore, there are three crowns. The crown of Kahuna gives you the ability to sanctify your body. The crown of Malchus gives you the ability to follow your spiritual calling, and Keser Torah gives you the ability to be a thoughtful creature thinking God's thoughts. And therefore, there are three crowns in the beginning of the Mishnah, not four crowns. Because that's the three parts, that's the three crowns. That says he puts it, the fruit, the branch, the fruit, the limbs, and the fruit, the branches, and the twigs. Right?
Leaves.
Leaves, thank you. Fruits, branches, and leaves. Right? The Mahus Ha'ilon, right, you would think it's the trunk, because he doesn't name the trunk. But what he says is it's actually the treeness of the tree, right? It's the Mahus of the tree. It's not analyzing parts. So Keser Torah is the mind as distinct from the body and the soul. Keser Shem Tov is the mind as me.
It's gonna have to settle, I think, a little inside me.
Okay, I hear that. I mean, you have time over the weekend to go through the whole thing faster.
There's never time on Yom Tov.
Not even like 2:00 in the morning on sorry, 2:00 in the morning. It's hard to follow any hour.
That's when it's gonna make sense.
I was gonna say 2:00 in the morning. It's a good time for Mishnayos, or to attend a shir. But yeah, no, I mean, it's Chazara, so it's not the heaviest thing you'd learn. But I think it would help to not have it broken into 8 pieces. You know what I mean? Like if you could skim and if you could review in a larger chunk so you see the flow as a whole, I think it would help.
That would probably help.
ויש לך לומר כי נמשך מאמר זה של ג' קצרים שלפניו ששיגג תלמוד Ola Zadon. Forgetting your Talmud, forgetting what you learned, right? Ola, he's going to explain better, but we'll say arises to sin. Ukfar bi'arnu ki atam hu, when he actually dealt with the quote, mimnei she'ein shigaga rak b'davar shehu gashmi. There's only forgetfulness when something's physical. Kamoshe is ba'ir. Avalo b'davar bilti gashmi. If there's no physicality, you don't forget it. Lefichach samach acharav mamar shel gimim ksarim. Therefore, then this is the next mamar, the 3 crowns. Ki akeser mora al madrega bilti gashmi. Because the crown is the non-physical level. Kamoshe b'yarnu lamala echa keser mora al madrega bilti gashmis. So this is, by the way, another reason why he didn't go with the naive sense that John and I would have. Because it can't be that the Keser Kahuna was about, the Keser Malchus was about the physicality itself, because to him a crown is not physical. So therefore, the crown associated with physical has to be being makdish, the physical, not the physical. Shalakacha keser utachshid ala rosh, just as the crown is a decoration as a jewelry for the head. Ke'adavar shu nivdal bilti gashmi hu ala adam. Similarly, the thing that is not that is separated, distinct, but that's not physical, is on the person. Masala love, right? Is rising up from him. It's like the mind, which is separate from the physical, Adam, and sits in the head. That is why all three crowns were in the base of Mikdash, which is Mikdash. It's Kadosh. Kodesh. It doesn't say Kadosh. It says Kodesh. And I, my dear friends, am dyslexic. The Keser Torah hu Kodesh Kadashim. Shu Yoser Nifdal Min Aguf. Keser Torah, therefore, is Kodesh squared, because not only is it the Kedusha of something that's attached to the body, but above it, right? It was the crown that was above, not low. Why does forgetting what you learned rise up to be a sin? Torah. Because if you study Torah like it's Torah, you wouldn't be forgetting it, because it wouldn't be a Gashmi study. Vikra Keser here Talmud Bifrat, Sharoi Sheyikra Zek Keser, Lo Mikra Velo Mishnah. And the reason why it says Talmud is because the pinnacle of learning is Talmud, not Tanakh or Halacha. And in case you're wondering about the taich that I just gave to Mikra, Mishnah, and Talmud, blame the Rambam. When he says learn a third of each, he defines each of the terms. By the way, a proof that Mishnah and Talmud cannot mean the Mishnayos and Talmud Bavli, the quote is from a Tana. There was no Mishnayos. There was no Bavli. He had to be talking about the style of learning that Mishnayos represents, and not Mishnayos, since there was no Rabbi Yehuda Nasi that wasn't born yet. Rabbi Tarfon said it, so there was no Rabbi Yehuda Nasi yet. Rabbi Tarfon's contemporary to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is 2 generations later. So thus the Rambam concludes that Mishnah is established halacha and Talmud is the whole reasoning process that gets you to halacha, like the how the halacha works piece. Therefore, it put the previous Mishnah on right before this Mishnah, one to teach about the other. And it's good to say this. The clear explanation, we already said, because these are very, very borrowed things, so understand them well.
To the Maharal was very borrowed. To me, it's a little fuzzy.
Right. What the things that attracted me to learning this Mishnah was obviously the threeness, and the idea that he ties the crowns to ties the crowns on top of the letters. No. So he ties the crowns to the three aspects of the soul. And I liked the idea, even though it challenged my thesis, that he is making each of the crown more of a process, more of an approach to Gashmias, right? There's no crown of Gashmias. There's a crown of Kahuna, which is a crown of sanctifying Gashmias. There's a crown of Melucha, which is the crown of ruling over, right? Bringing the soul into this world, right? There's no crown of the soul. There's a crown of bringing the soul into this world, right? So it does end up the opposite of what I would have pictured. In fact, it still feels like, a non-intuitive Kiddush. But there's this whole dynamic of how people work that's very there. And the other thing, and this is a very Rav Shimon Dika kind of idea, I personally hear in this whole Mufsha thing, this idea that the Kesher Shem Tov that rises above all because you're taking that internal shleimus and bringing it out to other people.
So we still don't really. We don't really have. I understand that you and I are looking at this a little differently, but we don't really have the Maharal saying straight out what the definition of Keser Shem Tov is.
Well, he says it is the perfection of the essence of a person, of the non-physical essence of a person.
If you understand that, then you're good.
No, I'm looking for the exact words where he says it. Not Lamed Aleph. Lamed Aleph I just included because how can we not learn the last, paragraph?
And Lamed.
Jashem ba amahuso hasichlis etzem hamufshat. I mean, as you know, he already said that mufshat min agashmi.
But he doesn't.
So I took it as shame being the Keser Shem Tov is the crown of the intellectual, non-physical essence of what a person is.
So it could be he's saying, I'm not sure if this is what you're saying or not, but it could be he's saying that the Keser Shem Tov is the entirety of a person's spiritual essence, which includes pieces of Kuna and Malchus, because those are pieces, they do have an aspect even in non-Kayanim and non-Levium and the Torah, and that includes everything, and that's what maybe defines the person.
Olal Gabehem means.
Right, and that's what defines the person.
Yeah. No, that's definitely where I'm going.
But in that case, then Keser Shem Tov doesn't really have its own definition. It's more of a teferis between the Chesed and the Gvura,
I don't see it that way. See, at that point, we differ. In other words, Keser Shem Tov is a perfection of the self, right? Of the essential self. The essential self has three parts, and therefore has three expressions. It's not a synthesis. This is the direction I've been trying to go in since we got to this Mishnah. To me, Keser Shem Tov is the perfection of the ability to transcend. Like kahuna is a particular kind of transcendence, right? It's a way of being holy, right? Malchus is a way of being holy. The very capacity to strive for holiness is the essence of a person. It's not really. You understand what I'm?
I think I understand what you're saying.
Right. What you're saying isn't wrong, but it's framed differently than Maharal does. Maharal's not making it like the synthesis of all three. He's saying that it's, they're all made out of wood. If you had perfect wood, right, then you could have a perfect branch. No, they're not all made out of wood because leaves aren't. But you understand what I'm saying? They're all made out of plantness, right? You need perfect plantness to achieve all three. You need all three. I mean, you can work on each of the three and achieve perfect plantness. But perfect plantness isn't the three of them combined. It's a capacity to get any of them. It's a more fundamental layer of accomplishment. And that was where I was going when we discussed the menorah, right? The menorah, he has this problem because he both discusses the essence of a person as being seichel, and therefore the menorah is intellectual, and yet the menorah is also the mitzvos and the essence of a person, right? Keser Shem Tov is all over the place. And it's not the Aron, which is also seichel, because that's Keser Torah.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's where I was saying, I think Keser Torah is having the right knowledge. Keser Shem Tov is perfecting your ability to be a Kohen, a Talmid Chacham, and a Melech before you even get to getting any of them. Or because human beings are a little more cyclic, as an effect of getting all three of them. Because it's a cycle, right? That was something I think frustrated John Baker when he tried learning Chavos Halava, Messias Yesharim before we met was that if you view Messias Yesharim as a ladder, you're never going to perfect Zerizus, so you never get past the first chapter. The whole thing gets very frustrating and hard to find meaningful. And when I suggested early on in the days of Ashtas that we have a learning that includes a little of this, a little of that, a little of the third thing, and the Musar piece would start with Messias Sherm, didn't appeal to him. And this is going back, 25 years, John?
I'm like,
That I remember that conversation from?
yeah.
Right, and the reason why it struck me was because how different, I view Messias Sherm as a spiral staircase. So you can't just work on one thing over and over and over again for the rest of your life, or until you get good enough that you're happy. You lift the Zerizus a little, now you're ready to lift the Zeros a little. Now you're ready to lift the, and so on. I mean, that was the way.
The Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh does it, right?
Yeah.
But the
Cheshbon HaNefesh is
okay. Benjamin Franklin, I know.
No. That part is not. The Cheshbon is, but his prelude is all his.
That's true. Yeah.
Right. But I was going to say though, the Cheshbon HaNefesh was a
Revolving goes too. But the pieces that Revolving does are so small that it's it's reasonable to work on this for a bit, work on that for a bit, work on the other for a bit, and then maybe after a couple of years come back and start again.
Yeah. Well, because he isn't writing.
But the pieces in the Mesilas Yesharim just feel like you've got to already be paid. You've already got to be got your mitzvah.
Yeah, right.
Mitzvah performance perfect. You've got to be at sun. You've got to be at least.
Right, because one's a book of theory and one's a how-to.
Start to work.
One's a book of theory and one's a book of notes of actual how-to that he did with Stephen.
Yeah.
That's the difference. That's why Messias Yesharim is talking about when you perfect this, then you can start perfecting that. And Rav Wolbe is actually like walking you through the steps.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Also,
yeah.
Just also keep in mind that this you're talking about the Ramchal. I mean, not every, he burned very bright. This is the book of everything he wrote was the work of a young man, pretty much. So of course,
not pretty much. He was gone. He was gone at what, 34?
I don't remember them, but I do. I mean, when you think of all the studies he was doing back in when he was 20, and he thought, well, he was Mashiach in a way. I mean, I remember the whole this discussion and that's the whole Ramchal and that's in a whole other story. This is a series on the Sephirim Chatter that's Sabbatism. That's another story. But anyway, my point was just that he doesn't allow for gradual development because his own fire burns so bright. Just a thought.
And also he did 39 years, by the way. And also he didn't have time to do anything gradually. I mean,
no, he was an old church.
You know what he reminded me of? There's a dispute in the Gemara about whether the Torah was given all at once in the plains of Moab. I don't mean the laws of the Torah. I mean the written Torah was given all at once in the plains of Moab, or was it given like at Har Sinai? Moshe was given everything up to Yisro, and then when Mishpatim happened, he was given Mishpatim, Megillah, scroll by scroll. This is Machlokas. So how do I remember who said which in the Machlokas? Rav Yochanan said it's given scroll by scroll. Reish Lakish says it was given all at once. How do I remember that? Because Rav Yochanan was the one who started learning when he was a little boy and picked up the Torah over a lifetime. Reish Lakish catches up, even though he started out being old enough, right, when the two of them are adults. So I remember that Reish Lakish is the one who believes that the Torah comes all at once, and Rav Yochanan is the one that believes it takes a long process. That's my own mnemonic. But yeah. So okay, so that's the Mishnah. I don't think it pays at this point to start the next Mishnah, but to give you a taste, we'll actually look at the Mishnah. Rav Elazar Kapar Omer, Hakina Tava Vakavod Motzinas Adam in Olam. Envy, lust, and desire for honor put a person out of this world. Remember that this was, according to the Maharal, Kina and Kavod were negative attributes of the Ruach, because the Ruach, by being mind, is about self and ego. And Taiva was a negative that came from the Nefesh. And according to the Maharal, they don't line up that way. And that's what we're going to look at next. And then after the Maharal, I added something new because I realized we couldn't go to the threes. We couldn't leave the threes without doing the first three I encountered, which is from Rav Hirsch. And besides, it would be nice if after spending all the time on the threes, it actually helps you with like what you're thinking when you look at your tzitzis. Give it a little pragmatics. It's not pragmatics, a kavana. So that's it. And then I'm promising myself that this will be our farewell to threes.
So you wrote it on top. Okay.
Well, I wrote it on top because I was once told when dieting, one of the best diet tools is to tell everybody else that you're starting a diet. Because that way, if you don't lose the weight, that way you're using shame to stay on it, because more people will know that you failed.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the so the same way I put down, because I'll fund another three and another three and another three, and then it won't be about relationships anymore. Right. The essence of why I wanted to do a series on relationships is because I think that we have a societal problem with self-centeredness, and that drachim of Judaism that focus on taking you out of yourself, even on the Beinam Lamakom level, right? Beinam Lamakom could devolve into being just about the self, since Hashem's so hard to experience, right? How do I get holy, right? And if you frame the very mitzvah, chesed could also be about how do I get holy, right?
Isn't there a famous story through Rasul Salanter? I forget which one, but basically the concept was that your holiness is going to hurt someone else, or not doing, right? If you forgot about the other person while you're being, quote unquote, being holy, then you're not actually being holy.
Right. So I don't remember the quote. It's very in character, so I said right.
But I seem to remember there was a story there.
There's an essay in Ale Shur that's on the Ishtas website called Frumkeit. And he defines Frumkeit as a detour many people make on the way to pursuing Avodas Hashem, where you get so caught up in the instinct of pursuit of holiness that you don't actually do what God wants. You're busy. It's an instinct. So you're busy thinking about yourself and how do I become holy? He quotes the Alter Slobodka, who says, "On V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, who loves themselves because it's a mitzvah?" Right? So V'ahavta l'recha kamocha can't be that you're loving, that the lishma of V'ahavta l'recha kamocha can't be l'shem mitzvah. Chesed has to be l'shem the other person. Because if you're doing l'shem mitzvah, then it's not kamocha. You don't love yourself because it's mitzvah, right? Then you get the person who's coming to a Shabbos table, the single, the divorcee, and like the person treats them like a pair of tefillin. This is, I'm doing the mitzvah of achnas zarchim, and you're the tefillin I do achnas zarchim with. You get that complaint a lot, right? That's
my house. Yes, 2 days ago, I'm dealing with a health issue with an infection. My brother came into my house. He was in Lakewood. He said, "I'm coming to wish you for Shlema." Okay, he's my brother. It's okay. He gets a pass.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the that's where I kind of yeah. So I don't know what to tell you with the or you saw Salanter though. So I found it very touching that the Maharal identifies the crown of the essence of a person with the crown of how other people, the fact that the essence of the perfection of the essence of a person inheres in Shem Tov makes that point very strongly. That the essence of a person is how he's being perceived, or how he allows himself to be perceived, or how he ought to be perceived, or whatever spin you want to put to make those two ideas one. Because, I don't really want to squash Moshe's insights. I just don't always agree with all of them. But that's good. No, this is good. This is why I wanted a dialogue. This is the big advantage of not teaching to people who think everything I say is Torah Sinai. I left that for a reason.
It's the season.
But the fact that he treats both as one thing, the crown of the essence of a person, the crown of the spiritual essence as divorced from the body of a person, and the crown of Shem Tov, of reputation, is one thing, is a very get outside of yourself perspective on Yahadus. Also, the fact that he defines Torah as a way to get beyond the body, and where Shimon goes from body to body and soul, to body and soul and immediate family, to body and soul and family and friends, to body and soul, family and friends, the Jewish people, to body and soul, body, friends, the Jewish people and humanity, to all of creation. So it's the Maharal's heading in the same direction where Shimon took me in. So, but that wasn't what we looked at. That was what we looked at a month ago. Anyway, so that's the agenda for the next couple of weeks. I don't think it'll take us long, but I could be wrong because I've been wrong before. And when I was wrong once? One time I said something, I thought I made a mistake, but it turned out I hadn't.
Classic.